So I'd like to present Heather Studley. She's our presenter today, going to be talking about ArcGIS Arcade. And I'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Heather.
All right, thank you so much, Keith. I appreciate that. This kind of started off as I know a lot of people have had questions about Arcade. I certainly get questions in my office. I've had questions from other people in other offices. And this is kind of born of do a really basic overview of the language and kind of how to get started with it. ArcGIS Arcade, how not to die in the tutorial level. And Arcade in and of itself is Esri-specific. It is proprietary to them and their products. So you can use it in Pro, you can use it in ArcGIS Online. I know that you can use it in field maps, although I myself have not had a chance to play with that yet. And it is designed for visualization, labeling, pop-ups, in Esri's own words, pulled directly from their site. Portable, simple scripting language for creating custom visualizations and labeling expressions. So it does define exactly what it does. The ArcGIS Arcade structure and logic developer page is really, in all honesty, probably the best place to start to get an idea of how Arcade works, get its syntax, see examples. It will cover everything that you need to know. How to do comments, multi-line statements, how to do your variables, built-in variables into the program, of which there are a few. And as you can see, you can go through and they have a lot of really good examples to get you started and get you going. They also have a playground that is just a place that you can go and mess around with code. They have some pre-built things built into that, and you can mess with it without having to worry about breaking anything. A few things on how to get started. The absolute basic things. The first thing you need to decide is what you want your expression to do. An expression can only return one thing. That can be a value, it can be a string, it can be a data set, but it can only return one thing. So you need to decide what that one thing is going to be and build your expression around that. If you need multiple things, you'll have to do multiple expressions for them and then pull them together when you actually build your pop-up, your label, whatever the case may be. After you've decided what you want it to return, pick your variables. What do you need to go into this expression in order to get something out of it? Use variable names that make sense, not only to you, but to future you and to anybody else who's going to be looking at this down in the road, or you might share your code with in the future. The other thing you need to remember is to comment everything all the time. You may think you know what you're doing. You don't. You're not going to remember it later. You think you will, but you won't. So just remember to comment your code all the time. A few things to kind of get you started and get you going with the basics. To create a variable, I mentioned earlier you want to give your variables useful names, because a lot of times what you're actually pulling in is a feature that has this really long, complicated name. You don't want to have to type that out or try to go and find it every time you want to use it. You assign it to a variable. Var is the keyword that you will use to assign a variable. Var is equal. Equal in this case is an assignment, and whatever your name is going to be. Unless there's a little semicolon at the end. We'll get to that in a minute. To comment, double slashes, we'll do a single line comment. This is nice also if you're testing your code, you can very quickly comment it out. Is it breaking? Figure out where your problems are from there. It's a great debugger. And if you want to do a block because you're explaining what you're doing, it's a slash and a star, ended with a star and a slash. Everything in the middle of that will get blocked out. Text formatting, new line. This thing is probably one of the greatest tools that is in Arcade. It is your best friend until you're trying to do labels in ArcGIS Online. We'll get to that. For other formatting things, with text formatting in particular, they have the text formatting tags page. They recently started adding things like text formatting new line and a few other text formatting functions as selectable things within Expression Builder, and I'll show those in a minute as well. This is a quick show for the text formatting tags. And you'll notice what they do is they'll go through label expressions in Arcade, which looks different than an annotation in Arcade. which looks different than a label expression in Visual Basic. So they cover this really nicely on this site. And again, their developer sites are amazing and cover really good information. A couple other little things. An equal sign assigns a value. So my variable name earlier, I was assigning it the value that I gave it. If you want to check against a value, does this equal this? Then you use a double equal. Semicolons are not always necessary at the end of the line. Arcade is an incredibly forgiving language. I had an old programming professor who used to use the phrase, it will give you a lot of rope. What you do with that rope is up to you. Semicolons are not always necessary at the end of a line, but if it is and you don't have it, it will break your code. So it's a best practice to just kind of add it at the end of all of your lines. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's not going to break anything if it's there. It will break it if it's missing and it needs it. Arcade is not case sensitive. So all lowercase, partials, all uppercase, doesn't matter. It doesn't care about spaces. So I like to put spaces in my code. I think it's easier to read, but it's not necessary. Here's a big one. This one took me forever to figure out, and it's huge. If you are trying to check if, like, is my value a null or is it blank, the keyword is empty. And I'll have an example later on how that works, but you're not going to be looking for null like we're used to in a lot of coding. It is empty. Another one that took me forever to figure out, special characters like ampersands, even if they're included in a block of text, will break your code. It still recognizes it as a special character. Moving on into examples. I'm going to start with ArcGIS Online because that really is where Arcade shines, especially with the pop-up capabilities. To really get into it, you do need to know a little bit of HTML, not a whole lot. You can find examples on how it works, and it's not too bad to figure out. The real basics on how to get into Arcade. It really is usable only for the custom pop-ups. If you want to do like a list of attributes, it doesn't really work that well. You want to do a custom attribute display. Click your little add to create a new expression, and it will bring up your expression box. Give it a title. This is more for your benefit, especially if you're using multiple expressions. You need to be able to keep track of what you're doing. So give it a title that makes sense, again, to you, future you, and somebody else who's looking at it. And then you have your code block, which is where you'll actually put in your expressions. Over on the side, you have things that you can add to it. So globals are effectively variables. They are the features that you're looking at, other layers on the map, other data stores that are available. And you can click through these, and then when you click on them, it will add them directly into your code. The functions includes things like those text formatting. So the text formatting new line is now in functions. You can just click on it and add it instead of having to remember what it looks like. Constants are mostly math expressions, things like that. If you have other expressions that you have already built, they will exist in there's a little existing tab that will pop up that will list those expressions for you. If you want to build an expression in an expression, that can be handy. Build your block, always test it just to make sure it actually doesn't bring up any errors of any kind. And then when you get into your custom, configure your custom pop-up, you will then add it. You can use the little add field button. It will be in alphabetical order, and it will be by whatever title you've given it. So your name that you gave it will show up in there. It'll be alphabetical. You find it, click on it. It doesn't list it in the code by the title. It gives it its expression list, basically. And that will just pop right into your code, and away you go, and it will run. Now, in this particular case, you're going to notice I've got something weird here. Up at the very top, I'm looking for is my address line null? So if, is it empty? So again, we're looking for a null, looking in my feature of address to. If it is, return a blank. If it is not, it will return address to, whatever's in that field, and a space. Why the space? Because if you notice, I don't have a space at the end of this one. So if it has a blank, I don't want that extra space that's kind of awkward and throws off the balance of my text line. So there's no space here. That's why I included it up here. And this is kind of fun things you can do. You can do text new line is great for this. You can have a blank that doesn't take up any space unless you have something show up, and then all of a sudden it now creates its own new line, and away you go. I'm gonna start flying real fast here because it's really easy to get caught up in details. I mentioned HTML. First line here, you see there's an expression and another expression and then some text and then a field. But if you open the HTML, which by the way is this little teeny tiny button right here, it's really hard to see. And now you can see there's all this other stuff in the background, including a color expression. That expression simply returns the color red if certain criteria are met. And now when I run it, if that criteria is met, it will bring up this big block of red text to warn people that you need to do something special with this. This is a complicated one. This is a huge one. This is an amazing feature and relatively new in Arcade. Liz Berry does a fantastic blog on the Pump Up Your Pop-ups with Arcade feature sets and Living Atlas. This is going to be a much simpler example. She really digs into this stuff. I've got my FEMA layers, which she knows are all grouped so that they display a certain way. I also have these copies of FEMA layers. Why is that? We'll get to that in a second. What this thing does is it looks at these. I have these pop-up ones. It looks at those layers. They have no symbology, no pop-ups. They are there purely as a background display, so they are always on. And then it looks to see, does it intersect with the feature that I'm clicking on, which in this case is a parcel. And then if it does, it will return whatever information I have associated with that. And it's this, here's all these list of return messages. At the very end, it concatenates them. You'll see these all have text formatting lines at the end of them, so that if it's blank, it just returns nothing. But if there is something there, it'll return a text, which you can see here, flood zone AE, with a space or a new line on that one, brings the next one down to it. If there was more of these, they would continue to stack up in the pop-up. How you bring your layers into your map makes a difference here. And this, again, took me forever to figure out. The way that this FEMA layer is for display is as a map image. It will not recognize that in Arcade. So you have to have them either as feature layers. You can do map images, but you have to bring them in one at a time. You can't do them as a group big map image. If you go back in, scroll up here for just a minute, back into this globals area, and you go like into your map, if you can't find the layer that you're looking for, it's not in a format that Arcade will recognize, and you need to bring it in probably as a feature service. Quick example on the labels, because this is actually pretty easy. If you're going and doing a label in Arcade, you click that little arrow at the very, very bottom of all the fields that are listed will be custom expression. So it brings up the same code box. This is an example of a road abbreviation dictionary that I created for ArcGIS Online. You can edit them. Works almost exactly the same way. Here's a big one for labels. Text formatting new line does not work with labels in ArcGIS Online. I don't know why. This is a repeating issue that Esri will say it has fixed and then it doesn't, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You just can't plan on that one working. For right now, it will not work with labels, just everything else. Getting into some of the stuff with Pro. Real quick Pro example. Another thing on this one. Labels in Pro is a slightly different syntax, which is frustrating. None of your Arcade code will transfer to ArcGIS Online if you're publishing your map, which is really frustrating. But you can copy your code. You have to modify it if you're doing labels. Keith went into this just a little bit when he was doing his pop-up tech talk a few weeks ago. Configure pop-ups. He showed you how to get into fields and how to modify the fields. In this case, we're going to be using text, the text option. Create expressions is at the bottom. Click the button. It will open up. This looks an awful lot like Field Calculator if you're familiar with that. The name of the expression. This is the same naming format that we used in the other one. And a title. Again, this is for your convenience, so you can keep track of it. The program doesn't really recognize this. It can be pretty much anything that you want. You create your code. It's very, very similar to Field Calculator and how it looks and feels. And then when you go back into your text and edit it, instead of selecting a field, you'll find your expression and plug it in. And then away you go. Pretty straightforward and simple on that one. I don't know if you can change this name or if it autofills. In all honesty, I've never bothered. I just fix the title so that I can keep track of it, and I let the machine do whatever it wants with the rest of it. To do labels, this is pulled directly from Esri's website. It uses quotes around everything. So if we were just going to do this normally, there would be no quotes around anything except for the text. The only thing that doesn't get quotes is when you actually bring in your field. I'm not sure why, again, I'm not sure why this is the way it is, but that's what you've got and that's what you work with. If you want to copy your label code from Pro into ArcGIS Online, you just have to take those quotes off and it should transfer over just the same way. Another real quick example, I wanted this one to highlight BLM properties. So if you got your parentheses designate, what am I looking for? Is my PIN identification number equal to BLM? Does it say BLM? If it does, I'm changing it to red. If it's not, then I keep it black, but still display the ID number. So you can see we've gone from black before it was done to red letters after it was done. I'm running out of time here real fast. I'm not going to hover on this too long, but if you look at this code, this is a public story map. Keith will include the link to it when he sends out the video. This will remain up. You're welcome to look at it anytime you want. And if you look too closely at this, you'll realize I made a mistake in that code. Didn't break it, I got lucky, but there is a mistake in there. Arcade can be used in field maps. I have not had a chance to test this myself. Introduction to Smart Forms and ArcGIS Field Maps does have a really quick example. They use it for a conditional visibility aspect as part of the Smart Forms. So there is some visibility. This demonstrated at UC a couple of weeks ago, and that was the first time I had seen it. So there's some possibilities there as well. Some quick resources that I have found useful. I mean, online searches are your friend, always, always, always. Including the phrase ArcGIS Arcade is kind of critical. Arcade obviously is a general term. If you just do that, you're not going to get any hits back. ArcGIS Arcade is your magic phrase, and then what you want the code to do. Kind of in orders of usefulness, the Esri community pages, if any of those return, those are usually pretty useful. The Esri developer pages, if those return, are pretty useful. If you're having issues like why is this not working the way that it should or why I think it should, anything from GIS Stack Exchange is going to be amazing. Those people really get into not just how to do something, but why is it not working? It can get pretty technical, but there's some really useful links out there. And of course, Esri staff blogs are great for tutorials, how-tos, and all those kind of fun things. All right, I do know we've had a couple things pop up in the chat. If you've got questions, let's go on to that.